The Great Depression of the 1930s, the Great Recession, the savings and loan crisis of the 1980s, and the Great Recession of the late 2000s. And you're probably all wondering, yeah, what about? Well, they all had something in common. At the heart of each of those crises was banks, money lending, and the Federal Reserve. And although I don't have time to go into how each of them played a part in the aforementioned calamities of the past, I do have time to explain how each of them work in the American economic system. Hello everyone, my name is Tex Arden Vargas, and over the next 5 to 7 minutes, I will be taking you on a journey through the banking system of the United States, at the end of which you will be able to see how banks, money lending, and the Federal Reserve are all connected, and how they facilitate the accumulation and exchange of money throughout America. By the end of this journey, you should have an understanding of the two main functions of the banking system: accepting deposits from customers and extending loans to individuals and businesses. How that money lending is made possible, and finally, what role the Federal Reserve plays within that process. According to Forbes Online, in 2012, roughly 90% of Americans had a bank account, whether it be a savings account, a checking account, or both. Comparatively, only 50% of the world's population had a bank account in 2012. Given those statistics, it's obvious that banks play a very large role in American society today, which brings me to my first point. The first main function of the banking system in America: accepting deposits from the public. According to Forbes, the average yearly income in America is roughly $50,000, and of that money, Americans put approximately $2,000 of it into savings every year. As the first primary function of the banking system, checking and savings accounts provide people with a central location to store their money, freeing them from having to store it under their mattress or in a shoebox in the closet. With the availability of automated teller machines or ATMs on nearly every street corner in America, Americans are able to keep their money in their bank accounts and withdraw money as needed, as opposed to carrying around large sums of money, as is the case in many countries around the world. Along with providing people a central location to store their accumulated money, banks also facilitate the exchange of money between depositors and borrowers via the money lending process. As the other primary function of the banking system in the United States, money lending is made possible because of the deposits made by its customers. When a bank receives a deposit, it is only required to keep a certain percentage of that deposit on hand, and the remainder of the money is loaned out to individuals and businesses in exchange for monthly payments plus interest. Because banks are allowed to use the money that they take in from depositors and loan it out, Americans are able to borrow money in order to purchase things like cars and houses, things that they would not normally be able to buy if they were required to pay all in cash. It is in this way that the money lending system facilitates the exchange of money throughout the American economic system. Now, as previously mentioned, banks are not allowed to loan out 100% of the money that they take in. They are required to keep a certain percentage of the money on hand at all times. This percentage is determined by the reserve requirement. The reserve requirement, in turn, is determined by the Federal Reserve of the United States. The Federal Reserve, otherwise known as the Fed, is an organization charged by Congress with helping to maintain a healthy economy. It has three distinct sub-organizations: the Board of Governors, the Federal Open Market Committee, or FOMC, and the Reserve Banks. Each of these sub-organizations plays a different but important role within the banking and loan process. The Board of Governors is the main governing body within the Federal Reserve. In addition to overseeing the other entities within the Fed, the Board of Governors is responsible for determining the reserve requirement mentioned earlier, which is the percentage of a bank's deposits it must keep in reserve at all times. The Federal Open Market Committee, or FOMC, is another sub-organization of the Fed. If you ever wondered why the interest rate on a mortgage loan was so high or so low, you need not look any further than the FOMC. The FOMC is responsible for setting the federal funds rate for the country, which is basically the baseline interest rate across the nation. The last remaining sub-organization of the Federal Reserve are the Reserve Banks. There are 12 reserve banks spread out all throughout the country, and each are responsible for overseeing the banks in their particular region. In addition to providing oversight of the banking system, they also work together to facilitate the transfer of money from one bank to another. So with that, our journey has come to an end. You should now have a basic understanding of the banking system in the United States and how it facilitates the accumulation and exchange of money throughout America. Before we go, let's take a quick jog down memory lane and review what we learned over the past 6 minutes. We discussed the two primary functions of the banking system, the first being the accepting deposits from the public, and we discussed some of the benefits of storing money in a bank. One such benefit is the freedom from carrying large sums of money around with you wherever you have to go. Then we discussed the second primary function of the banking system, which is the money lending. We reviewed how money lending is made possible, and we also learned that banks are only required to keep a certain percentage of their deposits on hand and are allowed to loan out all the rest. And finally, we discussed the role that the Federal Reserve plays in the banking and loan system. We learned that the Fed has 3 distinct sub-organizations: the Board of Governors, the FOMC, or Federal Open Market Committee, and the Reserve Banks. And we briefly touched on some of the various responsibilities that each of those sub-organizations has within the American banking system. So I hope you learned something today. Goodbye.